Welcome to the Dirty Verdict Podcast, where your hosts, trial lawyers Kyle Herbert and Bill Ogden, and mediator Peter Taff, talk with interesting lawyers and break down recent legal news.
All right, welcome back to a special edition of the Dirty Verdict Podcast. I'm Peter Taff here at the home of our guest today, Tony Buzbee. Tony, thanks for having us into your home and giving us some of your very valuable time today.
Well, welcome to my home. Here we are on a Sunday evening. The Cowboys are getting ready to play, so I know we're going to work quickly.
And the Astros.
And the Astros.
Yes, and I'm back from a very painful game in Dallas as we speak. We were talking about it, but one of the questions was, is the person that will play you in the movie version of the Paxton Trial there? Matthew McConaughey. He was, of course.
Yeah.
Probably very sad.
Tough loss for Matthew.
Yeah, and for us. But anyhow, it was an excellent game, great event. Congratulations to Oklahoma. You can keep it for this year. So, Tony, there's a whole slew of things we could, if we wanted to, we could sit here and talk for an entire day about different things. But I wanted to start with your campaign for City Council, District G here in Houston. You obviously have had tremendous success as a lawyer, financially, fame, all of the things, family you achieved. So what makes you want to run to be a city council person, which would be one of 17 here in Houston?
Well, it used to be the way this city was built. I mean, this city has been built by people into the fourth largest city in the country, the largest city in Texas. It's supposed to be the leader of Texas. It was built by people who were distinguished, people who had accomplishments in their lives, people who had long, illustrious careers, who decided then to give back. And that's how politics used to be. Politics today is really a chosen profession for some, for most, in fact. So, you know, I'm of the opinion that if you've been successful, if you've had accomplishments in your career, that you have a choice to make. You can either give back and try to use some of that wisdom, resources, talent, skill set, whatever, to make your home better, or you go out to your farm and ride a horse every day, I guess. So, you know, I have a real issue with people who run for office to be somebody. I think a lot of people that run for office nowadays are running for office to be somebody. I think people should run for office to do something. Big difference between those two. You know, too many times we see people who are really young in their careers who are running for office, trying to get a particular office and try to make politics their profession. I think the person who's filling this seat right now is like that. Her entire adult life has worked for either Montgomery County or the city of Houston. And I think we need to do better than that. I think the result we're seeing of that is 75% of our roads are terrible. We see, 900 broken water mains. We see a city budget that is in just complete disarray with major shortfalls coming up. We see crime just running rampant, out of control. All of that is systemic of the kind of people that are running the city and the kind of people that are running for office. And so for me, it's, the city of Houston, as you well know, you were there at the very beginning when I started my law career, has been incredibly good to me. I've raised 4 really incredible kids, have a very, very vibrant, very profitable, lucrative business that I spend a lot of time, effort, energy with. And this is my effort to give something back to the city of Houston, to try to make a dent in and try to change the course of the way this city is going, because this city is spiraling. And, I just saw something in the paper today that, city of Houston was one of the great, one of the 4th or 5th best cities in the country for, to live. And I just wonder if they ask the people that live here that question, because if you ask the people I'm talking to, and I've knocked on thousands upon thousands of doors and talked to thousands of people, and what they tell me without fail every time is, I'm concerned about crime. I'm concerned about the safety in my home. I'm concerned about taking my kids to school. I'm concerned about driving to work. I don't feel comfortable going to the Galleria. I don't feel comfortable going to some of the other shopping areas across town. And why can't we do anything about it? Why are the roads worse than Mexico? I mean, how is that possible? How is it that Dallas is doing so much better than us in almost every category, whether it be basic infrastructure, whether it be dealing with drainage issues, whether it be dealing with crime. Why can't we do that? Well, I think the reason is because we keep electing people who are running for office because they don't have any other thing to do. That's their best and highest use. By that I mean that's where they can make the most money. And that's pretty sad. If somebody running for council is running for council because they need that money to supplement their income, or that's a significant portion of their family income, they shouldn't be running for council. And they shouldn't be trying to be a leader because they're not leading anything. The short answer is the city is in crisis. And as you know, in my life as an adult, as a lawyer, I've been called upon in times of crisis. I was called upon as a United States Marine in times of crisis. And in my law career, I'm called upon in cases where people are going through the most difficult times in their entire life. And the ones people know about, like Rick Perry, when he was indicted, or Attorney General Paxton when he was impeached, those are the ones people know about. But the ones that people don't know about are times when people's, the breadwinner of the family's been killed, or somebody has lost a limb, or somebody's facing being put out of business by a larger business, or somebody is infringing on someone's trademark or copyright, something that they put all their life savings into. Those are, I get those calls. And that's really, this is the call here, meaning, the city of Houston will be my client, and I will treat it as such. And I will work just as hard as I've worked for every client I've ever represented, with the same passion that I typically represent my clients with the same work ethic. And I think I can make a difference. So I reject the notion that, you're only one vote of 17. I reject the notion that you're only one council person of 16. I believe that one person with the right mindset who's willing to do the work can make a huge difference. And I think that's the reason that the campaign has resonated with so many people.
So you're out there. One of the great things about running for office that you've done in the past is just getting out there and talking to people.
That's right.
Every day. That's part of the deal.
That's all there is to it.
So so you've mentioned some of the things you're hearing. I think there's a real sense that people in Houston are seeing, what's happened in San Francisco, what appears to be happening in Philadelphia with the mass, we've seen stories of mass looting. I've got friends in New Orleans who are seeing things. There's a feeling that you're at a tipping point, and those cities and this city can go one of two directions with crime. It can either go the San Francisco route, or it can go a better route. So crime, obviously you're hearing a ton about that. What other issues are you hearing about?
Well, it's just to focus on crime a little bit more, because if you were to leave here, this house here, which we're in River Oaks, which is on the very east side of this district. This is a very long and narrow district that goes from River Oaks and goes all the way through Tanglewood, past the Galleria, through Tanglewood, past the villages. Of course, the villages aren't included. All of West Houston Memorial area, all the way to Highway 6. Very long and very narrow. If you were to leave here now and you were to drive down Memorial, I challenge you to see a police car. You won't see one. You'll see one at the police officer's memorial, but there won't be a police officer in that car. But when you do see that car, you'll probably check your speedometer, because that's called deterrence. And we'll talk about that maybe.
I do it every time.
Every time, and everybody else does. Even though we know no one's in those cars, we always check our speedometer. But if you drive all the way to Highway 6 down Memorial, you won't see a police officer. Therein lies the problem, is that we don't have enough police on the streets. We spend a lot of time talking about, how do we deal with crime? We're talking about, people are being released on PR bonds and all these other things that people like to talk about. But what I want to focus on is, how do you prevent crime in the first place? And the way you prevent crime in the first place is you put police officers on the street, you have them patrol the streets, and you do it in a manner where it's not routine. So you don't have the same cop on the same beat every single day going the same place. You have them mixed up in different areas, different time frames. So the criminals are always guessing. They never know if there's going to be a police officer there, but they know there's been police officers there. The problem we have is 25 years ago, when I was in law school at U of H, I think it's maybe it's more than that, but we had 350 more police officers on the street then. Think about that for a second. There were more police officers patrolling the streets of Houston 25 years ago than there are today. The budget back then for the city of Houston was about $2.4 billion. The budget today is $6.1 billion. So that makes you think, where are our priorities? What are our priorities? It certainly is not policing. It's not public safety. And so that's the reason I think that almost every single person, almost without fail, will tell you when you talk to them, what is your primary concern in the city of Houston? And it's not because they're reading a lot of stuff in the Houston Chronicle about crime, because the Houston Chronicle doesn't report a lot about crime. It's because they're seeing these things on a daily basis, and they're concerned and they're worried not only for their own safety but for the safety of their spouses and their kids. And so we have to address that, because if we can't address that, then we really can't address anything else. But the other issues, of course, for West Houston are drainage. Hurricane Harvey hit us back in September 2017, late August, September 2017. It's been many years, 5 years since then. There hasn't been one drainage project of any significance in West Houston since. Even though everybody was talking about it, we got to do this, we got to have another reservoir, we got to do more detention, we have to do. The only thing the city of Houston did is required people who are rebuilding to rebuild if they're in a certain area of the city 2 feet higher. Makes no difference. And they've continued to put more and more concrete on the ground to create more and more drainage problems. So we got to do something about that. That's something people are concerned about, and they become more concerned about it during hurricane season than they are otherwise, but they're concerned about it. I think people, rightly so, are concerned that the streets continue to get worse. The thing about being a council person, these are not sexy things. These are not things that are incredibly interesting. And the truth is, the solutions aren't that interesting either. It's really basic stuff. You put your roads, repairs, and replacements on a schedule. We have 6,100 road miles or lane miles in the city of Houston. You should be doing about 600 every year. We're doing about 100, 120 per year. So we're 10, 15, 20 years behind. We got to do something about that. We got to stop spending money on sidewalks to nowhere that you've heard about, or, as much as we all love to ride our bikes, which I do too, we got to stop building bike lanes until we get the roads where they're passable. We got to start cleaning out drainage ditches. We got to stop wasting money at the airport. We have to stop wasting money at some of these TERSs that have run their course. There's a lot of ways that we can. TERS, tax increment reinvestment zone. Basically, it's a place that's a defined place that the tax money that's collected in that area is only spent in that area. One that people might be familiar with is the Uptown TERS. So that's a really kind of a high-end area, and it continues to use the money that it collects in taxes in that area. And I think we also can agree that it's run its course. We don't need a new bus lane. We don't need to expand more sidewalks there. That area, when you compare it to a lot of other areas across, whether it be West Houston or the whole city, those tax dollars could be used better elsewhere. The most shocking example of that is the Metro bus that runs there, the primary bus that runs in that particular bus lane. There's one rider. There's literally one rider, and I've always asked, who is the rider? Who is the person riding the bus? Well, guess who? I met that person for the first time about a week ago, and he is a deputy opinion editor for the Houston Chronicle. And he said, I'm the only rider of that bus. And I said, I've been looking for you. For 5 years, I've been looking for you. I finally found him. So we're going to have to do better. We're going to have to start spending the money wisely. We're going to have to, it's going to take some backbone. It's going to take somebody that has the wherewithal and the fortitude to just stand up to whoever the mayor is going to be and say, you're about to kill the golden goose. If you kill West Houston, the whole city will fail. And that's what they're doing, whether they're doing it intentionally or unintentionally. Something's got to be done about it.
In all fair, you mentioned that the city council person job does collect a salary of, I believe you said $65,000, but tell us what you intend to do with that money in the program you've talked about.
Yeah, I think that if anybody calls within District G 311, that call should be followed up on within 24 hours. They should have a dashboard so they can follow that call and track it. And so I would use that $65,000 to hire a particular person who does nothing but that, constituent service. I think people that are paying these taxes, and they're always upset about paying taxes, they should see some return on their tax monies. And part of that is just information. So instead of, there's a leak up here at the corner of Kirby and South Shepherd that's been leaking. It's a broken water main. It's flowing 5 gallons a minute. It's been flowing 5 gallons a minute for more than 7 weeks. Okay, that's 7,000 gallons a day. Okay, so you can do the math. I said we're talking about millions of gallons of water just poured out into the street. And I know that more than 20 calls have went in on that. When you call, you aren't told, hey, we've already got this call. You don't need to call again. There's no tracking. There's no way to know if somebody's actually doing something about it. All we know is every day you drive to work, you drive through a huge mud puddle, and you see the water just free flowing. The scary part of that is there's 900 or more of those across the city of Houston. And so what I'd like to do is use the salary that would typically go to the council person and hire an additional staff person to track these calls, track the calls within District G, make sure they're followed up on, make sure that there's somebody running down each of those calls through Public Works and make sure they're getting satisfaction.
Okay, so to be clear, you would not take that salary. That money would go to hire another staff person. Good. Okay, well, and so as we sit here today is October 8th. When does early voting start?
Early voting is October 23rd. I think it runs through November 3rd, and the election day is November 7th. Nowadays, most people vote during the early voting period. I think more than 50% of the votes are cast during the early vote period. We'll see if that holds true this time. But we are coming down to the end here.
And are there just 2 candidates in this district, or are there
actually 3? There's a third candidate who I've never met, I've never seen. He's never been at any event, but he is at least from what I read in the newspaper, he's a roofer.
So it's possible chance there could be a runoff when you have 3.
Sure.
Definitely will be some is every seat up in this particular election? So there'll be at least one runoff in one of those elections, I imagine.
So it'll think there'll be a runoff in the mayor's race as well.
Yeah, quite a few candidates there. And you're pretty active social media. You're out talking to people every day, pretty much.
Every day, multiple times a day. We start usually at a breakfast meeting, and we do. There's some days we do 8 events. I think Francis is part of scheduling the events. A lot of people want to have house meet and greets. Some are big, some are smaller. But I think we had, the number's 27 of them, so almost one a night. Tonight is unusual because we don't have one tonight, but we've had multiple ones over this weekend. People have like one in the afternoon, like an ice cream social, get people over to talk about, I just want to have a dialogue. What I believe about the city is we have some incredibly smart, gifted people with a lot of wisdom and experience. And so one person, unless they're incredibly stupid, cannot profess to have all the answers. But collectively, we have the answers here. One of the things the city, this is just a silly example, but the city spends $1 million on a poet laureate. And we have a lot of creative people across the city who would gladly be the poet laureate for the city of Houston on a volunteer basis. There's no reason to spend $1 million on that. There's a lot of things that are done that the city spends money on that we have people that would willingly volunteer their time and their talent to do these kinds of things without just throwing money at problems, and probably do it a lot better. And so it's really frustrating that the city, it's the answer to everything is just, let's just, allocate a line item and spend money on it. And typically that's how the city operates, and that's why we're in this shape.
How does that happen? Because I think most people would say we appreciate poetry and arts and all that. I know you do, but $1 million could be used for a lot of other things. How does that make it into the budget and approved?
It comes out of the bowels of the city of Houston. People that have been in the city, bureaucrats that have been in the city for many years. Typically, something like that, the idea hatches somewhere because somebody's relative or kid or friend or brother-in-law is in that particular area, and so they make a line item for it, and somebody gets a payday. And that's how, if you look at the airport, and the concessions and how those things are done. That's how it's always done. You can always figure out by following the money what's going on. Who is the consultant involved? Who is the lobbyist involved? You can figure out and follow the money and figure out why this found its way into the budget of the city of Houston. So, I was beating that corruption drum and transparency drum years ago. Nothing has changed. The only thing's changed is people quit talking about it. And, once I become a council member and I am able to start peeling back the layers of the onion, people are going to be shocked. And I can't wait to do that. People are going to be shocked about how the city spends its money. And they're going to be rightly upset that here they are driving on a daily basis on some of the worst roads in the United States, with, driving through mud puddles because of broken water mains, worried about their safety, knowing that if they applied for a permit, that's just, running through the gulag. And then they're going to figure out that somebody's pockets are being padded and have been padded for a long, long time. People are going to be really upset with that, and I look forward to that.
Well, good. Okay, well, we will, again, wish you...
I'm going to have a good time.
Yeah, yes, no doubt about that, and some other people are not going to have a good...
They're not going to have a very good time at all.
Well, so I want to turn to the Paxton impeachment trial. You were kind enough to let us interview you roughly about a month before. I think it was right before the rules were even announced. I think they were meeting at a hotel somewhere around Austin at the time. Mm-hmm. So you didn't know exactly what the rules were going to look like. And then they came out, and then you were off to the races. So first question, just a personal one. Could you ever imagine growing up in rural Queen City, Texas, that you would be the lead counsel for the Attorney General of the state of Texas, arguing a case what is a third of its kind in the Senate chamber?
No, because when I grew up, I didn't even know a lawyer. I didn't know the name of a lawyer. I never contemplated being a lawyer. I didn't have that concept in my mind. So certainly not. And even when I was in the Marines, I didn't have any of that in my mind about that was any sort of possibility. That idea didn't grow until 2 or 3 years into my Marine Corps service, and when I had a fellow lieutenant who had a couple of LSAT books, who I'd read every book there was on the ship, so I was just practicing LSAT questions with him and figured out I was pretty good at those and decided to take the LSAT. And then when I did pretty good on it, I decided, well, hey, maybe that's something I could do. Maybe that's something I could earn a living doing. And so when I got here to University of Houston, I had some confidence built up by that point because I had been successful at A&M. I had been successful in the Marines. I learned that I could compete against other people from all walks of life. So I went into law school with that mindset and made it into a job. As you know, I was there when doors opened and was usually there near the times when the doors closed at law school and did pretty well there. And so I guess it was just that kind of mindset. And so over the 20 some odd years of practicing law, had the good fortune to be involved in a lot of really interesting and unusual, unique, groundbreaking, if you will, cases. Won a lot of big cases and kind of developed a reputation as somebody that's a winner. And I think that's the reason that Rick Perry called me the first time to help him in his debates, and then that led to him calling. I developed a trust with him, and he knew my skill set was solid and was at the top. I think he obviously knows a lot of lawyers, had been around a lot of lawyers, and I think when he was indicted, when he called me to the governor's mansion and said, "I want you to lead this team and help me put together a team," I think that kind of solidified, I guess, in the Texas bar at least, that this is one of the leaders of the bar. This is a guy you call and think the chips are down. And because we were successful, and you obviously had a big role in that with Governor Perry, when the impeachment occurred, I got tons of texts from different people like, you should be representing him. I'm getting the same kind of text now for another case, as you might imagine, with Donald Trump. And and I thought, and my reaction to that was the same one it was when Rick Perry called me the first time, which is if he wants me to help him, have him call me. not going to chase a case. I don't need to do that. So we made that connection, and of course, I knew that I wanted to be in the case, not because of the politics involved, just because it is and was, the biggest case in Texas history, in my belief. And I didn't know how it was going to play out, and I was very concerned that if it went the wrong way, then it might be damaging to my career, because I feel like I have 20 more years or more to go, and but I thought that it was a case that could be won, a case that should be won, although there's always external factors and forces out there that you have no control over. So I can tell you that standing day one, actually we went over there the day before. Lieutenant Governor, who was the presiding officer, wanted the lead counsel to come over the day before. He wanted us to do a walkthrough. He wanted to talk to us. And so we went over to this. I'd never been in the Senate chamber before. I used that opportunity that day after we had our little discussion to go get my little, my badge, which I've kept. I think it's kind of interesting because they listed me as, which I thought was really funny, as, let me see if I can find it, listed me as the intern for the Secretary of the Senate.
So you got a little picture.
They made my badge, and I don't know why the young lady who was doing the badges, she wrote down intern. So I thought, well, I guess I can, at any point I can go back with the Secretary of the Senate and just, be there any day I want, I suppose, since I'm an intern.
Yeah, I could run bills back and forth.
Yeah, maybe so. But going that day, walking in there with the entire committee, the entire House committee was there, and their counsel, including Hardin and DeGuerin and the woman who was a former Supreme Court Justice, what's her,
Harriet O'Neill.
Yeah, she was there, and all the House managers were there, and a few other House reps were there. And that was, well, I walked in there. I'd never been in the Senate before. I had been as a regent. I had to meet with a lot of the senators to get screened when I was approved after I was nominated to be a regent, but I'd never actually been in the chamber. And it was something else. It was like, it really hit me at that point. Like, my gosh, this is something. This is a big deal. And I've been in a lot of big cases and with a lot of pressure, and but never anything like that. And I looked over there at all those guys, and then I was just kind of processing everything. And then Lieutenant Governor came out with his crew. He keeps 3 or 4 staff members and lawyers, chief of staff. He had the Secretary of the Senate, Patsy, who I was the intern for, came out, and he basically told us, I want there to be utmost in decorum. I want this to be professionally done. He said, I know all of you by reputation. Y'all are the very best of the very best that Texas has to offer. It's going to be an honor for me to, I'm going to do my best to preside. And he said, I'm going to be asking for your help on some, if you want to file a motion or, we have bench conferences. But he said, I want this to be done and treated with the appropriateness of the occasion of not only what we're doing here, but where we are. And with the understanding that this is, only the second time in 100 years that a statewide official has ever been impeached. He never gave a sense that he was for or against it. He played it straight down the middle, incredibly professional. He introduced his jurist, the former justice from the Fifth Court of Appeals, Dana Myers, I think her name was. She was very professional. He introduced everybody. We shook hands, asked if we had any questions. I proposed a few housekeeping things that I thought would give us a little bit of advantage. I typically have no interest in knowing who the other side's witnesses are, because I don't want to tell them who mine are. And a lot of times when we go into a trial, it's the defense lawyer who always says, well, can we get a 24-hour rule or can we get a 48-hour rule? Meaning we want to have 48 hours notice or 24 hours notice of who you intend to call before they're actually called. Well, so I proposed that because on both of our witness lists, we had over 150 witnesses on each list of unique, different witnesses. We had subpoenaed more than 200 people. And so I kind of pitched that in a way that this is kind of how it is done, Judge. This is the way it's typically done. I'm sure they won't disagree with it. And they didn't. He said, okay, well, that's the rule. It's going to be a 24-hour rule. You have to give them notice before 24-hour notice. We'll start it at 11 a.m., blah, blah, blah. So that was a victory for us. The second thing that I brought up, because, he really didn't say, y'all have any input or anything. I just started going, doing kind of like back in the day, we did mock trial, just like stand up and start talking until somebody tells you not to. And I said also, we need to deal with these exhibits. I mean, they have 300 to 400 exhibits on their exhibit list. I mean, I don't need to know what they intend to offer, what they not. Why don't we try to get together, Judge, and do a pre-admission? And what I was really interested in wasn't really where they were pre-admitted or not. What I was interested in is what they felt was most important on their side to get into. I wanted to see what they were going to propose. And so Rusty, thinking that he was going to curry favor with, because you can tell Lieutenant Governor Patrick was a little, this was not in his strike zone. I mean, he's a legislator. He's really smart, obviously. But, here he was presiding over us, some very, some people would say sometimes contentious lawyers who had a lot of big fights in the past. So I proposed, let's see if we can agree on some of these exhibits. So he didn't have to go through exhibit by exhibit and make arguments and slow things down, because we did have a 24-hour rule. We only had 24 hours each side. And so Rusty, I think he was trying to curry favor, stood up and said, we're not going to object to any of their exhibits. And I, in the back of my mind, I said, score. And so I said, well, but that doesn't answer the question, Judge. The question is, I need to see what they want to offer, because maybe I can do the same thing. And so that we'll have them a list of what we actually intend to offer, by close of business or 8 o'clock tonight or whatever the number was. Well, of course, our team, we circled up and we objected. We objected everything they had. So, there Rusty had already said that he was going to accept everything, and we, but we got to see kind of the ones they wanted to offer up, so I could kind of get a sense, because we didn't know what their case was. And that's what people don't understand, is we did not know if they had something beyond what we had read about in the newspaper. We had reviewed millions of pages of documents, but they kept dumping documents on us every day, and they would dump documents on it that very day. And so I wanted to see, I was hoping that by that point, they at least had structured their case in such a way that they knew what their top 25, top 50 exhibits were. So, and usually from the documents, I can get a sense of what their actual case was. And when they offered up, the ones that they really wanted to get pre-admitted because they really were going to use them with their first several witnesses, I could see that they didn't have anything, at least at that point. And I continued to think throughout the trial that Hardin's got to have something in his hip pocket. Surely this ain't all he has. I kind of felt like Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men. Surely you have more than that. Surely you have more than that. That's what I kept hearing in my head, because I kept thinking they had some surprises. And then the other time that kind of thought came about was when they finally had to give us who their witnesses were for the next day. It was exactly who we expected. It was Jeff Mateer. It was Ryan Vassar. It was, it was the ones that we expected. So there was nothing from their side that was unexpected. But back to the point, it was very monumental feeling to walk in there and to know that the very next day, or whenever it was going to be, I guess it was the very next day, that chamber was going to be full, that we would have senators behind us. It was really, really made you understand that you were doing something that very few lawyers had ever done and very few will ever do.
So quick follow-up on that. Was there not a rule? Because in a normal civil case, obviously, you typically have to have supplemented all your discovery, meaning shown all your documents you intend to use, usually 30 days before trial. And then obviously the judge will entertain exceptions if there's some reason, good reason for it. Did in this case the rules allowed them to just keep late producing?
The rules didn't allow it, but they kept doing it. And we had motions pending to exclude. They were not granted. Their argument was, we sent out subpoenas. We sent out timely subpoenas. As soon as we receive these documents, we're turning them over. That was their argument. I don't think that was exactly true. I think they had a lot of snafus on their side. They were very disorganized. Even though they had some really high caliber people on their team, I think they were having a real difficulty with organizing their documents and frankly organizing their case. Because I know there were times that they turned over things to us that I know they had in their possession for 30 to 60 days, and they just realized, we haven't turned it over. But the bottom line was their primary argument is that, Judge, we sent out, and you know this, Judge, because you signed the subpoenas, because he had to sign every subpoena and issue it. And he had to, the DPS was the ones that were either sending them by mail or serving them personally. So he knew that there were tons of subpoenas for documents and for people sent out. And so their position was, as soon as we receive it, we're turning it over. In fact, they were producing 10 to 15 boxes of documents per day, every day of the trial, even up until the day before closing arguments.
10 to 15 boxes of documents?
Day. Yes.
Huh.
Yeah. I mean, when I say boxes, they would produce them electronically. Of course, I want to have my people review them. You know me. Part of the team was reviewing them electronically. I don't trust that process. I wanted them printed, and I wanted them reviewed. And every morning I would wake up, Colby and a few of the other people on the team, and the first thing I would do is text them about 5 a.m. Was there anything new in the documents that they produced last night? And every day it was, no, nothing new, nothing really new, nothing important, nothing that you need to worry about. Because I was just thinking they're going to at some point produce something that's going to be worrisome. They, in their rebuttal case, they showed up with a financial expert who wanted to do a deep dive on Nate Paul's finances. And I think the judge, rightly so, excluded that person. But they were doing this all the way up until through our defense case in chief, up until rebuttal. They were producing documents, and people, there's been some talk in the newspaper and the press since this case was over and since they lost about, they didn't get to put in this document, they didn't get to put in that document. Well, first off, every document that I've seen that Aaron Epley, who is a fine lawyer, good lawyer, every document that she's discussed with the liberal press were documents that were in evidence. Now, whether she understood them or whether she wanted to make new arguments about them, that's a different issue. But what hasn't been talked about is that, we had witnesses excluded. We had 3 of the maybe the only 3 impeachment experts in the country that he would not allow to testify. Would have been our first witnesses.
What was the basis for that exclusion?
The basis that we typically see when there's a judge, like I'm the judge, I know the law, I don't need somebody telling me the law. I felt like, my pitch was, that is typically the case. It's the judge is the person who issues the law. However, this is a political trial. It's a public trial. The senators need to hear what the prior term doctrine really means, the history behind it. They need to understand what is and what is not impeachable, what is an impeachable offense, what is not an impeachable offense, because there's a lot of history on that that's not just case law. And they also should hear about how the articles are written, whether there's in any universe that any of these articles, with a few exceptions, could ever be an appropriate charging instrument. So we had 3 experts on that were supposed to be our first 3 witnesses that he excluded. But the Texas Tribune will never report that. You probably remember during the trial that I had it took me a long time to collect all the data surrounding the home renovation. But I had it hook, line, and sinker. I had it from front to back that demonstrated in no uncertain terms that not only did Ken Paxton pay for those home repairs, but that he was intimately involved himself with the home repairs, meaning he made many trips, he and Angela, to Lowe's, to a different Lowe's, to Home Depot, where they were picking out items and they were pricing items and they were pricing the most inexpensive items. They did price granite countertops. They decided not to do it. It was all in this packet that I'd put together, and he excluded it. And, you know, despite their position at the beginning is we're not going to object to any document, you know, even Lieutenant Governor, it wasn't lost on him. He said, I'm going to exclude it, but you hear what you're saying, Mr. Hardin. Mr. Buzbee has framed these documents that these absolutely exonerate not only Ken Paxton, but Angela Paxton, and demonstrate 100% that not only did they pay for the repairs, they were intimately involved in all the choices made, they were driven by cost, and that there was always the intention that they pay because of the documents here, and it demonstrates that. And you don't want the Senate to hear that. You know, these people they know what's going on, and they know that you don't want them to hear that. Are you going to stick with that? Is that really your position? And he had to circle up with his people and came back, well, we might go through some of them, and maybe there may be some that we're willing to admit. And I think that was one of the times that I got a sense from Lieutenant Governor that his belief on the case had morphed a little bit. At the beginning, I think his head on the case was, you know what, let's air it out. Let's see if there's really evidence there. Let's see. I'm going to keep an open mind, but I think the public's entitled to know. There's been a lot of allegations. The public's entitled to know. If you think the evidence really is 10 times worse than you say it is, than the public knows, bring it. If it really is stronger than horseradish, whatever that means, bring it. And they didn't bring it. And I think and I think as the case progressed, you could tell, because you could tell that the Democratic senators who were going to vote for conviction no matter what, they were getting madder and madder. They were getting madder at the House managers. They were getting frustrated with the process. You could hear them back there like slamming their hands down, upset as things happened. They were very upset after Mateer's cross-examination. They were very upset for obvious reasons. They were very upset when Mitch Little cross-examined Ryan Vassar, when Vassar said we didn't have any evidence, when Vassar had to admit that they were in text messages. I think Mateer admitted this too. They were going back and forth trying to figure out how to write their complaint with the FBI where it showed some kind of crime, knowing that they didn't have any evidence of a crime. They were very frustrated by that. And then they were very frustrated when Mitch Little made Vassar say, we had no evidence. There was even a few people who ended up voting to acquit, I think started out with the idea that they were going to vote to convict. And they were very frustrated. Lots of ruffling papers, and they would circle up over there and chat amongst themselves as the evidence was going forward. And you could see things going bad for them. And so it's insulting to me, and it's insulting to the process for people who were only watching maybe just what the camera was picking up and didn't know what was really going on behind the scenes, to say now that, the fix was in from the beginning. Well, the people that say that don't know what the hell they're talking about. They don't know, because I guarantee you, had they come forward with evidence, had those witnesses not crumbled like they did, there would have been a conviction. Problem is, there was no evidence to support it.
Yeah, so I was thinking through where we were sitting when we interviewed you last. So at that point in time, the quote-unquote conventional wisdom was they've got great evidence, and I honestly did not do my own deep dive analysis of the actual impeachment in the House. But that was all the media reporting was, they've got great stuff. This guy's really bad. He did some bad things. It's all documented. They made it sound like this is going to be the easiest trial.
Open and shut.
So that's out there. And then there's a consensus that Lieutenant Governor is, on your side. Maybe, I know politics have different factions and things, but philosophically on your side his colleague, his husband is the one that's being impeached. And then, of course, the fix was in as far as every Republican had already decided how they're going to vote, and Democrat. So everyone knew what the vote would be going in. So we know what happened with the evidence. Turns out, I guess, that if you do it something really quickly like that and you don't subject it to cross-examination, the advocacy, the adversarial system, you can have a problem when it's actually...
You know what they wanted to do at the end? They knew their case was so weak. They wanted to put one of the investigators that had testified in front of the House on the stand. Somebody that had been there in this court during this entire process, the entire time, to get up there and try to shore up their case. And I mean, that's how desperate they were. But the mistake they made was they rushed something through without collecting any evidence, without actually looking at it claim by claim, element by element, to see if they really had evidence to support what they were doing, other than very informal, kind of almost giddy. If you read any of the statements or watched the videos of some of the statements they took from the so-called witnesses, they didn't put them under oath, and they would talk to them, and there were 3 or 4 of them talking to the witness at the same time. So it was kind of like if we had 3 or 4 people talking to me here, and the 3 or 4 people had an agenda of what they wanted, and they kept trying to spur the witness to say, and this, right? I heard this, right? And it was like that. It was like the most ridiculous, unprofessional thing you've ever heard. The best example is the interview they did of young Drew Wicker. I keep calling him young Drew Wicker, but Drew Wicker, who they kept trying to, they asked him, was there ever a time when you delivered anything to Nate Paul? Said no. Well, they came back 5 minutes later in the interview. Wasn't there a time when you delivered something to Nate Paul? He said no. 5 minutes later, after a few things were discussed, another person said, how many times did you deliver something to Nate Paul? And then he finally, at some point, said, you know what, maybe there was one time. And then they kept pushing him, trying to get him to say that it had something to do with an open records request, that it had something to do with a folder that somebody signed out. It was the most unprofessional thing. And then they didn't take the statements and show that to the investigative committee. What they did instead was, after these 15 statements, some of which were not even recorded or videoed, then they went themselves, without being put under oath themselves, in front of the House Investigative Committee and related the evidence that they had collected from those statements. It was the most unprofessional. It was the opposite of what anyone learns in law school about how evidence is taken and how to support any sort of claim against somebody. Any court in the country would have dismissed this out of hand and would have sanctioned them for that kind of conduct. But instead, it supported an impeachment. And I think it probably because it was near the end of the session, and because, I wasn't just making this up. I mean, there was no doubt that a lot of ridicule came Dade Phelan's way when he acted incredibly intoxicated, running the House business. And Ken Paxton, who already had issues with Dade Phelan and already had issues with the House, issued a public statement basically condemning him and telling him he should resign. Dade Phelan made the decision at that point to push it through, to put it in front of a vote. And everybody that voted for you, I bet with a few exceptions, thought there was, in fact, really solid evidence that they had talked to witnesses, and the witnesses would say this because that's what the investigators had told the investigative committee, who then turned around and told the full House. So it was a supposition from a supposition based on another supposition to the entire House. And they voted. And that's when people kept saying, well, it must have something to it because so many Republicans voted against Ken Paxton. Well, that's because they were sold a complete bill of goods. And the evidence just wasn't there. And you could see when they had even almost convinced Wicker, even during his questioning of him. Again, not under oath, multiple people shooting questions at him. He was like overwhelmed, you could tell. They had convinced him that there's other things. He says, well, you're saying that he did. You have evidence that yeah, you'll see. Yes, there are other things. So they had convinced him that there was something there that wasn't there and was trying to push him. And I could tell when they had spent hours with him before he testified.
Did he have a lawyer during these interviews?
Had a lawyer who just let him talk to him as much as he wanted. And that lawyer refused to let me talk to him until I sent him a letter and put it in writing. I understand that Drew Wicker has spoken to the House managers multiple times. I'm expecting you're going to allow me to do that. He let me do it the night before he testified. The night before. I spoke to him for about 25 minutes, and I could tell that he had been convinced that he was, I could tell from the way he talked that he was, and I knew that we were going to have a bloodletting because I knew I had the documents. I asked him, did they ever show you your statement? No, I haven't seen the statement. Did they show you any of the documents from Home Depot, from Lowe's? Did they show you pictures of the kitchen after the fact? Did they show you? No, I haven't seen any of that. I said, okay. He said, you have that stuff? I said, you'll see it tomorrow. And you could tell on the stand when he testified, when I cross-examined him, the way he started out and the way he ended. And here's one of the things that most people don't know. Do you know he sent me an email after the fact? He sent me an email and apologized.
And this, just for context, this was the former personal aide to the Attorney General?
This was the body man. This was the one that the entire allegation of bribery, the bribery being that Nate Paul had paid for kitchen renovations, that entire allegation grew out of Drew Wicker claims he heard Ken Paxton say Angela would like to have granite countertops. And the Kevin Wood, the contractor, said, I'll check with Nate. That was that one statement. From that one statement grew, oh, Nate Paul paid for kitchen renovations. Nate Paul paid for granite countertops. Nate Paul paid for new cabinetry. Nate Paul, none of it ever happened. None of it. Drew Wicker learned that when he was on the stand, and he said, I want to thank you for the strong quality defense you provided Ken with. He deserved no less, and it's clear the process should have never been allowed. He says, the right verdict was reached, and I'm glad that the general was restored to his office and working back in Texas. And you know what I said to him? Send your email to Ken Paxton. I don't know why you're apologizing to me.
Yeah.
Send it to him.
So it's interesting to me, or surprising, because the way this was, again, set up was that the evidence was so overwhelming and so strong. So when you told me that they were producing documents to you, I guess one of your dogs doesn't like this question. Yeah, so Tony, when you were telling me about these boxes being, documents being produced all throughout the trial, 10 plus boxes a day, that was surprising to me because the way it was framed was that this evidence was so strong and voluminous. So I thought the day they impeached him, they would have boxed that up and that would be it. And there wouldn't be anything more to do.
That was the way it was supposed to be done. That was our position, was that whatever the evidence was at the time of impeachment, that's the evidence that we try the case on. They changed their position on that. Their position was, no, the House acts as basically a grand jury. There was probable sufficient evidence to charge, and now it goes to the Senate to discover and try the case. So that was their position. That's never been the way it's ever been done. I mean, obviously it's only been done a few times, but in past impeachments, all of the evidence was developed in the House, and then whatever evidence was developed and vetted in the House then gets sent to the Senate for a trial. This did not happen that way. They had no evidence in the House. They had it, and people thought I was just, it was just a soundbite, that it was hearsay upon hearsay upon hearsay, but that's really what it was, because the witnesses that they spoke to were not put under oath, and in many cases they would talk about what they had heard from other people or heard from other people. The prime example was when David Maxwell, the Texas Ranger, testified. He had told the House in his unsworn not the House investigators, in his unsworn testimony, I don't even know if you call it testimony because it was just a recorded statement, that he had heard that Drew Wicker met Nate Paul in an alleyway near midnight, and Drew Wicker had delivered a package that was a grand jury information that showed all this non-public information. When he was put under oath, actually in the trial, and he was asked about that, he's like, "Who did you hear that from? You acted like when you gave that statement to the house managers, investigative folks, that you had personal knowledge of that, but you didn't have any. He said, no, I heard that from 5 or 6 people. Okay, name one person that said that. And he couldn't name one, which is Exhibit A for why cross-examination is so important. Because he had heard that from somebody who had heard that from somebody else who had heard that. There was no truth to it. I asked Drew Wicker, point blank, did you ever meet Nate Paul in the dark at night with an envelope, secret? No, none of that ever happened. And when Dave Maxwell was cross-examined on that and asked, okay, give us one name of someone who said that. He said, I can't even give you one name. I just had heard that. And that was the basis of their whole claim that Ken Paxton had provided non-public information to Nate Paul to further Nate Paul's business interests. That's the kind of evidence we were dealing with. Now, it made us look like great lawyers, did it not? I mean, we just knocked those things down one after another. But what's scary about it is that somebody can be impeached in a 4-hour hearing who's been elected statewide, regardless of what you think about it, regardless of whether you like the fact that he sued the Biden administration 40 times, or where that just drives you nuts. That's not the point. It could be anybody who's a statewide official. If that's the way they allow impeachments to occur, you've weaponized impeachment. And so that means the voters, their voice means nothing. That it comes down to now 31 people in the Senate who are going to decide who our statewide officials can be. And that's the reason I'm so proud that we were able to prevail. Because if we had lost the case, then you would see a lot more impeachments. It didn't matter. It would basically be, okay, it's kind of like, we used to try cases back when the appellate courts were so conservative in Texas, and they still are at the Supreme Court. But it used to be, the position of the insurance companies, we'd have a really great case, and we were going to try a really great case, and we were saying, hey, we're going to win this case, we're going to win it big. We should try to resolve the case. It's the right thing to do for everybody. The defense lawyers, their position would always be, that's okay, you may win at the trial court, but we're going to win at the appellate court. So, you're going to have your day in the sun, but ultimately we're going to win. That's how the elections would be. But basically, voters, you can elect whoever you choose for whatever reason you choose, but ultimately we'll impeach them and we'll decide who our statewide officials are. And that cannot stand. You cannot have that. That's just basic weaponization of a process that was not intended to be used the way it was used here. And so, any voter, regardless of whether you voted for or against Ken Paxton, should be offended by that. That these guys, because of animus, really, animus towards Ken Paxton, for the Democrats, it's for, basically political animus, because they just don't like his point of view and his values and his conservatism. And the Republicans, either because they didn't bother to do any due diligence or because of other reasons, participated in this. And didn't just participate. What's sadder and more irksome to me is the gag order that was issued. The thing with Ken Paxton was beat up in the press for a long, long time after this impeachment. The impeachment occurred in May, and he was beat up in the press and really didn't fight back and didn't really even start fighting back until he hired me. The first time that you really ever heard a counter argument against a lot of this stuff was when me and Cogdale did that press conference in Austin. And then shortly thereafter, a gag order was issued. And so we were basically, and I'm not suggesting that the lieutenant governor did it purposely, but my position was, wait a minute, we've been pummeled in the press for months on end, and now we can't even fight back. And now the House managers who had allies at the Dallas Morning News, the Houston Chronicle, the Texas Tribune, they continued to provide information, leaked information to those entities. And there was a story every couple of days about this piece of evidence, about that piece of evidence. And then at some point they did this evidence dump, which led to another week and a half of story after story. As the press sifted through and took things out of context, they would run a story on something, and they knew that we couldn't respond, but because they were legitimate, honest, credible journalists, they would call us and they would say, we're about to run this story about this, the kitchen renovation, about this email, about that email, about this. And I would say to them, good and well that I can't respond. You know that. And you know this is incredibly unfair, but you're going to run your story anyway, so knock yourself out. But there will be a day when the whole story is told, and it was, and it did happen. And then when it happened, what's really infuriating is we won the case. We demonstrated that the whole thing was complete baloney, like I said we would, and because nobody's mentioned that. Remember, the very first thing I said in the very first press conference in Austin, Texas, with a whole slew, there were probably 50 press outlets from all over the country and local. I said, this whole thing is baloney. This whole thing is baloney, and the Attorney General will never be convicted on this evidence. And I was right. And even after all that, the same press entities, the same reporters, now their position is, oh, the whole thing was a setup, the whole thing was the fix was in, and they've continued to try to litigate the case. The last correspondence I had with the Dallas Morning News, when she wanted to ask me about a piece of evidence that the House managers continue to put evidence as if there's a case still going on, which is ridiculous. I said, when do you guys stop? You lost. It's total sour grapes. Go do something else now, because Ken Paxton is being the Attorney General, and that's what he's going to keep doing.
On the evidence and that you mentioned hearsay, typically in a civil case you rarely object. However, in this case, you and both sides objected quite a bit. What do you think the reason for that was?
Some of the times I objected because I didn't think the lawyer on the other side was worth a flip.
Didn't know evidence at all, and threw them off and made them just completely ineffective. And I figured that out after the first couple of objections. Part of that was our time. The lieutenant governor had told us that unless somebody objected too much or there were too many bench conferences, the objections would be counted against whoever had the witness. So, I objected, and they were all valid objections. Now, whether the rulings were right or not, that's judges make rulings, and we always agree or disagree with them. But there were certain lawyers who put on witnesses that I objected because I knew they couldn't ask the right kind of question. Made them kind of look foolish in some respects. And other times I objected to screw up the flow. I objected at times to try to educate the Senate and sometimes educate the general public about what they were hearing and what the real significance of it was, whether it was none or, to try to put my spin on it. So every time, yeah, you're right. I typically never object. I've gone week, 2-3 week cases and maybe object 1 or 2 times. And when I do that, I try to do it outside the presence of the jury because I don't want them to think I'm trying to hide something from them. But this was a completely different kind of case, different strategy. There was different reasons for doing that, whether it be, they were after the first couple of days, I could tell they were very concerned about their time. We had circled up on our time, and I had decided with Ken Paxton's, who's very, very smart. This is a very smart guy. And we'd kind of come up with what we called the 1/2 rule. He wanted to make it the 1/3 rule, but ended up being about the 1/2 rule, which is if they spend 2 hours, we'll spend 1. And because if we'd have just went hour for hour with them throughout, we would have never been able to put on a witness. So they would just run out the clock, and our clock would have been run out as well. So we had to start using half as much or even 1/3 as much time. So at some point they would have to stop because otherwise they wouldn't be able to cross-examine any of our witnesses. And I envisioned a situation that might occur that they would run out of time and we would have time left, and I could put on anybody. They could not cross-examine them, including maybe Ken Paxton, because he really wanted to testify. And that was a battle that we fought because he had things he wanted to say. But, we never got that point. And so what was the rationale for him only being there at the opening and closing?
I personally did not want him there with the camera put on him for certain parts of the testimony because that would become a sideshow. I think Lieutenant Governor is a little surprised when, after he the order, it was a separate Senate resolution that required Ken Paxton to show up at 9 a.m. on that day. It didn't say show up and stay. It didn't say you had to be there day to day until, it didn't say anything. It just said you had to be there at 9 a.m. So our position was, and I think it was, there were people in our team that were unhappy with that, but Ken Paxton, our position is that we're going to follow the rule to the letter, and then you go do what you need to do. And I think he's said to the press that what he was doing during that time frame was monitoring the trial and raising money, which I think that's what he was doing. And so I was happy with it because I didn't want him to be a distraction. Not because I thought he was going to distract me. It's just I didn't want, when somebody's testifying or something that's sensitive or whatever, that the story, instead of focusing on what the person was saying, that the press the next day would be what his reaction to it was. Because they did that a lot with Angela, if you remember, that when there was testimony about the so-called mistress and other things, the newspaper the next day the highlight would be there and they would have a picture of her. And I really felt terrible that happened with her. They would have done the same thing with him as well. So I had him come back for the closing argument just because I intended to refer to him and kind of talk to him, put this man back to work, that kind of thing. And I wanted him to be there for that. But, there was some thought that from some of the more political people that, he shouldn't attend at all, he should do it like Trump did it. And I didn't like that idea because, I did understand that the senators, for the most part, didn't want to be there too. They'd rather be a lot of other places than, dealing with something like this. But on the other hand, I wanted to avoid, it was kind of a happy median to have him there, as required, and then having come back for closing argument.
So presiding officer, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, not a lawyer, no legal training, never served as a judge before, did have the benefit of legal consultation with a former judge, but to the point that somehow he was totally in your camp and going to rule every way you wanted to go. What do you say about that?
Total bull. No way. That's I can tell you from firsthand, having from the very first day that we talked about the case, the way the rules were written, they were not written in our favor. The rules were written in such a way, and of course he had to approve those, were written in such a way that we couldn't get a dismissal on any count. Even the ones like attorney pro tem, it's undisputed. There was never attorney pro tem, and that was what was required for the conviction, but we couldn't even get that dismissed. I think he had the mindset of a lot of the other senators, Republican senators, which was, Rusty Hardin has made these statements to the press. The one thing that I think that he didn't know that I knew is Rusty Hardin's full of shit most of the time. And when he talks to the press, and people, and to his credit, the press believes him. But, he even gave me some pause. Well, maybe there's some evidence out there that I don't know about. But there wasn't. And it pretty much turned out what I expected, which was Rusty Hardin was full of shit. And I think that's what kept the rules the way they were. I think that's what kept them from voting to dismiss some of the charges that were clearly never sustainable, because they wanted to see what this evidence was that they had been told in a press conference existed. But as far as the lieutenant governor, you could kind of see as it went on, especially after the first couple of witnesses, you could see a little bit of a shift in some of the ways he was looking at things, because there was a bench conference where they kept talking about a co-conspirator, that the evidentiary rule, there's an exception for a co-conspirator, some of the things, they said in furtherance of the conspiracy. And I kept telling Lieutenant Governor was they had not demonstrated a conspiracy. Conspiracy requires an agreement, whether stated or unstated agreement, and then action in conformance with that. And they haven't established that there's any agreement. And he said, come up to the bench. So he came up to the bench and he said to the I think it was Erin Epley, he said to her, listen, where is the evidence of agreement? between these two. So, well, that's been the whole case, Judge. That's been the whole case. He said, I haven't seen it. He said, so you have two choices. You can either stop asking these questions, claiming that there's an exception for co-conspirators' conversations, or you can go back out and I'll just state on the record so everybody can hear that I have not seen any evidence of that, and I will sustain the objection. Your choice. And she said, okay, I understand. So that ended that. And that was the first time I got a sense of where his head was, because up until that point, I didn't have any idea. And I felt a little better about it that he had listened to what was going on. He had seen what had happened with these witnesses, and he'd starting to see the evidence the way I saw it, which was sparse. There was hardly nothing there.
Yeah, I thought he did a good job, and
Great job,
considering his lack of legal background in particular. But one of the things too, you just want, like you alluded to, you're going to get bad rulings or rulings you disagree with from judges, no matter how great they are or how bad they are. But he gave the impression to the viewer that he was honestly and earnestly trying to reach the correct answer and the fair answer. And sometimes he would, there's some ones that I would say, well, I don't think that was the right call. But I thought you just want that if you're being judged or you're being the lawyer in a case, you want to just know that your judge is being fair and trying to do the right thing. And
what people didn't know too is that on some of these more critical issues, he had his chief of staff who was a lawyer, and he had two other younger lawyers, and then he had this Fifth Circuit State Court of Appeals judge, and he would sit with them and talk to them, and he said, like, we're unanimous in this, and there were times when she would say that he would have an inkling of how he would go, and she would whisper in his ear, and then he would go a different way. So he was doing his best to call balls and strikes. And on some of the more critical issues about how the Laura Olson was dealt with, and some when they excluded 3 of our experts, they would circle up and spend 5-10 minutes discussing it before he would come back and say, okay, this is what our ruling is. So he was trying to get it right. So I applaud him for that.
Was the decision for the Attorney General not to testify, was that something, I mean, vast majority of criminal cases, the defendant does not testify. That's like day one of criminal law. Was that the case here where you thought, I think we've won, we don't need to put on any evidence, it can only hurt us?
Yeah, I mean, I thought we were so far ahead at that point that there was no reason to do it. If I felt like it was needed, that something needed to be explained that only he could explain, then he would gladly do it. I didn't want him to do it, but it wasn't necessary.
Okay, so on the lawyers, obviously you have a long history with Rusty Hardin, probably not personal history with Dick DeGuerin, but obviously growing up here as a lawyer in Houston, we all know who he is and his reputation. And then on your side, you got Dan Cogdill, who you've known for many years. Who were some of the lawyers on your side or the other side that you did not really know before this that really impressed you?
Let's start with my side. Mitch Little, I think, made himself into a star. He is, is a Harvard undergrad, UT law guy. I did not know him. Apparently, we have cases against him at the firm. I had no idea, but he had been a long-term lawyer for various issues for Ken Paxton, and he was not supposed to even speak in the trial. When I first went to Frisco or wherever it was, the whole team got together the first time, he was somebody that I kind of gravitated towards. I could tell he had a good head on his shoulders and had a good sense of what we were actually doing here. I think other people never understood what on the team, what we were doing, but Mitch did. But he, and I think Ken Paxton trusted him and of course trusted me a lot. But he wasn't supposed to speak. And I think it's very proud that when I had assigned witnesses who would do this and who would do that, and there was always a lot of discussion. I would listen to people's ideas and stuff, and ultimately somebody had to make a decision who's going to handle what witness. And so, but he took on a couple of witnesses that he wasn't assigned because time constraints and other things that the person assigned didn't want to handle it. And he stepped into the breach, and he didn't just do it. I was worried because I didn't know how well he was going to do. I didn't know him. But when he cross-examined Vassar, the first thing I said to him, I said, I hope your wife watched that. I said, that was top of the game, man. That was impressive. And I don't say that to very many people. That was impressive. And he was very, very proud. I think he really, really showed the caliber of a lawyer he was. Young Oso on our side, for a lawyer who's 4 years, again, stepped into the breach. He wasn't supposed to be taking witnesses, but he took a couple of witnesses and did a really fine job. And on the other side, the problem that they had over there was it seemed I didn't know who was in charge over there. I didn't know there was a lot of people over there, a lot of lawyers, a lot of politicians, and it was hard to figure. And the way the way it was structured, you had House members doing the opening statement, and I don't think they really thought through who their audience was. I don't think they really put together a coherent theme and try to tie it all together. They failed in that respect. When I first went into the first day, I went over and said hi to Dick DeGuerin because I had talked to him on the phone before on other matters, and I told him, it's an honor to be in this with you, and we're doing something historic here, and I'm proud to be doing it with you. And I said the same thing to Justice O'Neill. I told her, it's an honor to be doing this with you, and I'm proud to be here with you, and just to kind of understand the historicness of what we're up to. I didn't say anything to Rusty, of course, but I was disappointed after it was over. Some of the comments made by Dick DeGuerin, I thought they were below at least the stature that most lawyers hold him in. Saying things like, they won the case in spite of Buzbee, which I think is pretty ridiculous. Anybody who watches a trial would probably disagree with that statement. It just sees, it's coming from a place, probably a bad place where he is right now because he lost one of the most historic trials in Texas history. But as far as performance, I was impressed with Erin Epley. I was. I think she developed a following, rightly so. I think she did a good job. We have totally different styles, of course, but I can appreciate her passion, and I'm sure she has 100% belief in her side of the case. She was just wrong, but it doesn't take away from her performance. I thought she did a pretty good job.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about on your side, it was obviously clear that you were in charge, and you were the guy that they would look to and that Lieutenant Governor would look to. Their side, if you can expand on that, the rules set out that only the House managers could give the opening and closing. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. And that was by design. I think you need to know that was not somebody did that to handicap their side. That was because the House managers wanted the victory. That's because they wanted to be identified with the victory. And so that was that if the House managers had have wanted the rules where the lawyers, the actual outside retained lawyers, were the ones to do the speaking in the opening and closing, they would have gotten that. Because I have no doubt that Senator Huffman would have given them that. Because I have no doubt that they had a dialogue and a continuing dialogue throughout the trial with the Rules Committee. And I'm not suggesting that there was anything untoward about it. I'm just suggesting that those rules were made in such a way that the way the House members wanted them. And so I think they made it such that they would be the ones to do the opening and closing because they thought they were going to win the case and they wanted the victory. They wanted it, and the unfortunate part for them is that they lost, and they lost miserably, and so now they're identified with it. So I mean that's, but yeah, it was hard to figure out who was the actual decision maker. But I think ultimately it was the House members. I think they went up to most of the bench conferences. Murr did, but they had 3 or 4 different law firms over there. So, the guy with the bow tie, I never knew what his name was. He took witnesses. He was an outside lawyer. I thought for the long time he was another House member. I didn't know.
Because neither of the House managers that did the opening and closing, they didn't take any witnesses.
No.
I think that too, as just a spectator, it was a little confusing because it was set up that, hey, this is Rusty Hard and Dick DeGuerin. These 2 legends are going to try this case against Tony Buzbee and Dan Cogdill, and it turned out it was Buzbee, Cogdill, and then on their side, you'd see Rusty a lot, but I felt like as it went along, he didn't take as many witnesses. It was more Aaron Epley and his law partner Daniel Dudko. I felt like was out there a lot, and then Mr. DeGuerin, I don't recall more than maybe 1 or 2 witnesses.
2, I think.
Yeah. So that was, again,
it was very disjointed, and again, I wasn't privy to all the inside baseball going on their side. I do know you could see that there was some. They weren't happy. They weren't happy. You could just tell from the demeanor. You could tell from some of the more active senators, ones that you could tell were actively wanting an impeachment. You could tell that they were unhappy with the House managers and the way the case was going. And I still remember, I didn't have any idea what the verdict was going to be. I felt like I knew what it should be based on the evidence, but I was not so naive to believe that would rule the day.
You cut that off after rule the day.
Yeah, I was not so naive to believe that would rule the day.
This is coming again.
But I remember the senator who was behind me, who was really animated a lot of the time, who was grousing about, evidentiary rules that were made, and would run over to Senator Huffman, and they would be going back and forth during certain things that happened. I remember as we came out and we thought the verdict was going to be read, or they were going to vote, I guess, and then they took a 30-minute break. So I went out and smoked a cigar, came back. When I came back, I saw him go over to the House managers, and I saw him tell them something, and then I saw them go, okay. And
for anyone listening, you made a listening only, you made it look like they were disappointed.
Very disappointed, and he kind of shrugged his shoulders, and then they all were hugging one another. And so then I felt like, well, okay, maybe this is, but even as I did vote after vote, I kept thinking, okay, well, maybe they're going to, at the very last one, conduct unbecoming, or whatever that last crazy article was. But he was acquitted on all. And then there were these 4 that were remaining. So I was passing notes to Mitch and trying to find, the Solicitor General, the former Solicitor General, was on our team, and I needed some legal information about how we're going to dump these last 4 that were held in abeyance. And so I said, okay, what I'm going to do is, if all are acquitted, I'm going to stand up and move to dismiss the last 4. And Mitch sent me a note that says, hey, man, can I do that? And I just took the microphone. I said, hell yeah, man, you deserve it. Do it. And so he was going to get that privilege of doing it, and I think he deserved it. But then Senator Birdwell stood up and did it himself and dismissed the last 4 on motion from the Rules Committee.
And those were the ones that were going to be deferred because they involved the securities case?
Yeah.
That was a question we had on the show, because it's hard to get information like that because there's so many. You Google Ken Paxton impeachment, you get 9 jillion stories. So those last 4 were ultimately dismissed at the close of this case. No more. The impeachment is over.
Dismissed on the motion of the chair of the Rules Committee, Senator Birdwell, and then once that happened, then Lieutenant Governor Patrick, because without those being dismissed, Paxton would not be reinstated because it would still be pending. So that's why I really wanted him on that day, because it was my idea, was for him to march over back to his office and say, I'm back in business. Didn't happen that way. It was kind of what the way we did with Rick Perry when we went down to have him booked. We had a rally after he went in to get his picture taken. He took one of the most beautiful pictures a man could take in his mugshot, and then came outside and did a press conference. That's kind of what I had envisioned.
Well, then you went and got ice cream.
Then we went and got ice cream, but so when he dismissed those, the lieutenant governor reinstated the attorney general, and we were kind of in shock a little bit, like, oh man, this all went exactly the way it should have went. We just won. In fact, at some point, and I forget, Mitch would know this better, but at some point during and it may even been some point when the vote was going on, he passed me a note and he said, Tony, we just won the trial of the century. And of course, me being me, I was like, hold your horses, big boy. Let's just wait till the last vote. And then Patrick called us back into his private offices back there and gave us each a little coin, shook our hands and said, good job. Still just was playing it. Wait a minute, he may have done that after the close of evidence, because I forgot he gave that fiery speech
right afterwards.
Which was completely unexpected. Totally unexpected, but very vindicating. But I think as a politician, people who were watching that, who saw the evidence that I saw, and who wondered where he was on it all, he certainly didn't want to be associated with the side that brought this foolishness. And so it was a very astute political move. And I think the right thing to do as far as amending the Constitution to prevent this from happening, because this should not happen anymore. For me, it was awesome. But for Ken Paxton, this was terrible, and somebody shouldn't be put through this. So,
yeah, it was interesting. So the case, like many jury trials, just conveniently evidence closes, closing arguments on a Friday. Everyone wants to do that. So then the jury, no one likes to sit and wait for juries. Very nerve-wracking. So juries obviously are human beings and want to go home on Friday. And so usually you get a lot of verdicts at 3 o'clock on Friday. These guys and gals, ladies, went, deliberated late Friday, and then said, we're not done. We got to keep talking. And so he had him come back Saturday. So what was the feel on Friday night?
I was nervous as a dog passing peach seeds, as my dad used to say. I was nervous. And, it's only so much you can talk about it. And talking about it doesn't do anything, doesn't do any good. So I just try to turn it off and try to focus on something else. But it was nerve-wracking. And in fact, I told Colby I'm going to sleep in on Saturday. And I was trying to do that, and he had texted me and said, hey, they have a verdict. The lieutenant governor wants us back. And so, he had to come knock on my door to wake me up, because I was really going to sleep. And because I hadn't gotten any sleep for 2 weeks. And so I just remember we were driving over there, and I wasn't talking. I was just like, okay, whatever's going to be will be.
And then so just for a couple of people, you're talking about Colby Haller, who is a associate at your law firm.
He would come. Colby would spend the evenings with Del Chafino, another young lawyer, and Ruth Rivera, another young lawyer who was back here in Houston, reviewing documents that were produced. They were splitting them up, and there was another team that was reviewing documents in Austin electronically every night. And he would bring me coffee in the morning at, I think we had to be there at, I can't remember anymore, but we would drive over to the Capitol every day. He would come pick me up, and he would usually find me on my balcony smoking a cigar at the Four Seasons, and he'd collect me. We'd collect whatever I'd prepared for the night or that night, and we'd head over and greet the day.
And we can't leave out another key part of the team, and that's Eric Arroyo.
Eric had his own
fake
Twitter. Somebody made a Twitter for Eric. I purposely started because I heard it. I was monitoring social media and so forth throughout the trial because I knew who our jury was, and I noticed that Eric was somebody had created this fake Eric Twitter, so I kept using Eric's name quite often, and somebody had told me I was getting, you can imagine, hundreds of texts hourly, people that were watching and stuff and asking questions and this and that, and without just sitting there looking at my phone, but I would check it periodically. And one of the things was that they thought I was calling the Lieutenant Governor Eric or something. So at some point I said, well, I could fix that. So at some point I said, Your Honor, could I just introduce Eric? Eric, stand up. Your Honor, this is Eric Arroyo. This is Eric, and he's handling our audio visual needs, and he's a real pro or whatever, so that kind of, and then they felt the need to introduce their person, Stacy or whatever her name is, nice lady. And then, Eric looked at the Twitter later that night and saw that, Eric was famous again. And that was really funny.
He was clutch under pressure.
He was clutch. I mean, I got on his rear end, as you might imagine.
Yeah.
Because he had some of these documents, and usually when you have a PDF that's a multi-page PDF, if you're going to reference, he knows this, but you're going to reference one page of that, you want to break that out so you can get to it quickly on your desktop. And he was spending too much time. I had to have talks to him. And you know how those talks go.
Yes. I said this in another podcast. Like when, lawyers, younger lawyers in particular, are like, I want to go try this case. I love trial. I'd say, well, go try one with Tony and tell me how much fun it is.
See how you like it.
Because Eric got it. But I know, it's just intense, and it's a very important case, and that's going to happen.
Eric did very well. In fact, he asked for a raise after.
Well, I fully endorse that decision you made to give him a raise, or accepted that proposal.
I didn't say I gave him a raise. I said he asked for one.
Well, I hope so. So I obviously didn't. I mean, there's all these kind of side shows. I really try to keep it focused on the legal side. I mean, but I'll close with one that was kind of silly. But you just reminded me of the social media, the orange.
Yeah.
What was the deal? Because we talked about this. I didn't see you personally during that time, but I saw you on other social media platforms, and you looked the same.
So John,
you are now.
It was. I got several texts from people sending me pictures of myself, and I just remember one of them said, "Hey man, you need to wear more sunscreen." I was like, "What are you talking about?" So I looked at the picture, and it was like orange, and then, I made a joke of it because it was kind of a joke. I mean, I wouldn't sit. The Houston Chronicle, when I met with the editorial board, they said, "Well, you accused us of doctoring your picture." I said, "No, I didn't. I didn't know where the pictures came from. They were texts to me. I didn't look at them it wasn't like I was reading the newspaper every afternoon. I just was. People would send me pictures and say, you look very orange in this picture." So I don't know. I kind of cracked a joke about it and made a joke about it when I was block walking. But why it was like that, whether people, manipulated it, whatever. I mean, whatever. Obviously, I'm tan as I am now. So
that was kind of the day when I got a lot of texts from my friends asking me what was going on with Tony.
How tan I was?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think somebody told me it had something to do with the camera in the Senate and the fact that there's wood. It was all wood. I don't know, but I came out looking really brown. Look, I'd just been down in Mexico.
But it didn't. It only happened on that first day. I felt like they got it fixed. Okay, back to a substantive question. The famous Rusty Hardin accidentally resting.
Yeah.
How did that come about, and what's your take on that?
Ultimately, I don't think it made a difference because, I guess, but I've had a lot of battles with Rusty, and, sometimes I've made the case that Rusty doesn't play fair, with people and takes advantage of some of my clients and really doesn't make me happy. And so when that happened, I felt like that their case was pretty damn weak. And so when he accidentally rested, which he did, and he still had, which is, as an aside, it's funny to me that they're continuing to try to litigate the case in the newspaper after the case is weeks over. And they had 3.5 hours or so left. they had time left on the clock to put on if they thought they had other evidence. They had the time. But he directed his own witness, and then at the end of that direct, without me crossing him, rested the case in a very somber way, like a very formal, official way. The House of Board of Managers rest, hereby rest, or whatever he said. And I just thought, how stupid was that? If it had been anybody else, I would have said, you didn't really mean to rest, right? And I would have cross-examined the witness. But because it was him, and because of some of the things that I think that he's done in the past, which and I'm sure he did it believing that he was doing the right thing, but I thought, some of the underhanded stuff, telling the press that, in this case, some of the things he did, telling the press that the evidence was 10 times worse than the public knew. And I know full well he didn't even look at it. He didn't look at it, because if he'd have looked at it, he would have never made that statement.
And you believe that was part of the whole kind of angle here was to encourage Attorney General Paxton to resign?
There's no doubt that's what that was. They were hoping for a crescendo of people calling for his resignation, and they weren't able to get it. But let's be clear, they got Karl Rove, they got a lot of House representatives to do it. They got a lot of silence from a lot of key people. But some people spoke up for Ken Paxton, but a lot of people were very quiet about it. They even got one of my very best friends to write an op-ed against Ken Paxton. So they were working very hard to try to force him to quit. And I think the reason that the rules were written the way they were, and I think the reason that we lost on our dismissal motions, was because of that effort that they made, and it started in that press conference. Were somber and talking about how bad the evidence was. And what's so frustrating is that they didn't have any evidence. They didn't even start to collect actual evidence till after they had impeached this man. And it didn't come back the way they'd hoped. And they'd made all of these really bold statements. And even somebody that's partisan against Ken Paxton looking at it would have to agree that, first off, there was nothing new. There was nothing new that people hadn't already heard about. And what they did have was weak. It was very weak. And so when he did that, when he accidentally made that mistake, I jumped on it. Because I knew this was a political trial. I knew it was playing out on TVs and computers and live stream across the country and across the state. And I thought that was a very apropos, a very appropriate way for their case to end. A big mistake.
And that witness, what was his name?
Brickman.
And that was set up to be a colossal cross-exam by you of him, because he was pretty pugnacious, and he was the only one that had not reached a settlement, which is what kind of brought this.
Well, he had.
Oh, okay.
He had. If I'd have cross-examined him, which I would have busted him up. I would have busted him up. I had his texts and emails with Karl Rove. I had his letters from his lawyer imploring the House of Representatives to settle the case, to fund the case. A guy that claimed he was getting no money from it was all a matter of principle. He was begging the House to fund the settlement. So I would have cut him up really badly. But as much as I wanted to do that, what was more satisfying to me was for them to end their case on a big error.
Yeah, and more importantly, it was interesting that the lieutenant governor didn't let him off the mat on that. A lot of judges would have let them off the mat on that, but he, I guess, kind of to your point, he'd seen enough at this point.
I think most people had seen. There was nothing. There wasn't going to be anything that was going to help them. It was only going to go downhill from there.
Yep. And then y'all put on a couple witnesses after that?
Yeah, there was always the good thing about our team was there were a lot of different people with a lot of opinions, and so somebody had to be a decision maker, and sometimes those decisions weren't popular. But there were some people on the team that thought we shouldn't put on a case at all, but I didn't like that. I didn't like that because it was a political trial, and even though I didn't think they'd met their burden and hadn't even approached meeting their burden, I thought it was important that people watching knew that there was some real analysis that went into some of these public information requests and what the analysis was and how they looked at it and why the Attorney General's office did what it did. I thought it was important that people understand that when you sue the Attorney General, you're not suing him individually, you're suing the office. And so there's a process that goes forward, and that he had delegated that authority to settle that case, and there'd been mediation in that regard, and the two lawyers had decided to settle the case, and that decision had been made not because they were trying to hide anything, because they did an analysis of how much the case, even though they felt it to be meritless, would have cost the state just in defense more than $10 million. So I wanted people to hear that, and I wanted people to know that this is not Ken Paxton being sued. This is the Office of Attorney General, and it happens every day across the country. When you sue an office, that's how it works. And so, in order to fund the settlement, it has to go to the legislature, because they control the purse string. So everything was done exactly the way it's supposed to be done. And so for the House to be up in arms and alarmed about asking for monies to resolve a case, that's how they settle every case every day. And I wanted them to see the analysis of why certain people were terminated, that these were political appointees, and that part of being a political appointee is you have to have a sense of trust between the boss and the political appointee, and that was out the window. So it doesn't matter why it was out the window; they could not work together. When Brett Webster came in, they were outright insubordinate to him. They were hostile towards him. They yelled at him. There were all kinds of things that happened, and I think the guy from HR laid that out by the numbers, because he's a long-term HR guy, and he had analyzed every single person's position. And then finally, the last witness talked about the AG's office and what it had accomplished and the kind of work it was doing, because there was some suggestion that the AG's office was decimated and it was in disarray, and that was not the case. It never was the case, and it was still doing the state's business. And I thought that was important for the senators to know, that the office was working as it was intended. And so that was kind of what I wanted to get across. I really wasn't addressing the articles themselves line by line, but instead just kind of giving the public and the jury a sense of how things are supposed to work and how they worked and how the office was still functioning in the right way. So that's why I wanted to put on some witnesses. And we could have, if I thought we needed more, if I thought there were real problems in the case, we had 100 witnesses that we could have put on. We could have put on witnesses until the very, some people have suggested, you ended quickly. Well, one of the things you learn early as a lawyer is that when you're winning, shut up and sit down.
Yep. The testimony of the so-called mistress, that debate on whether she was going to testify preceded the resting, as I recall. I felt like there was maybe that ruling on that may have messed with them, or at least kind of got them.
I don't know she had her own lawyer. Her lawyer had filed a motion to quash. That was handled in chambers. That transcript has been released. Mm-hmm. The only they couldn't figure out how they wanted that presented to the people. This available, not test. I forget the wording that was come up with. That I said, that's your statement. My point was, that's what's going to be said, and the lieutenant governor drilled down on that to make sure that's what they wanted, because that was really their language. But the cases were very clear. You can't have they had framed this as a criminal case. They had framed it that the House was the grand jury, and that this was, the burden of proof was beyond a reasonable doubt, and on and on. So it was very much like at least mechanically like a criminal trial. And the case law was, there's loads of case law out there, and that was argued by her lawyer and confirmed by Dan Cogdell, that you can't have somebody who's going to plead the fifth in a criminal case and use that plea against the accused. It's a civil case, if the accused, whoever the alleged tortfeasor, pleads the fifth, then that could, in Texas, be used to, there could be a presumption in a civil case. Totally different. This was a third-party witness who, for whatever reason, wanted to plead the fifth, and I didn't understand why, because there was nothing she could have said that was incriminatory to her or to Ken Paxton, but that was her decision. And so if she was going to do that, that looks really bad when, I didn't think she should have done it. I would have been happy for her, because she had a real job. She applied for the job. She had a real salary. She was doing real work. There's nothing that was, the evidence was already in evidence. Her employment application, her apartment records, her salary, her check stubs, her job description, the project she was working on, that was all in evidence already. It was all part of the evidence that was already put into evidence. And there was a deposition that Nate Paul had given where he was asked directly about her and about how she got the job, and he testified about it. And he had said that she applied, I made her a project manager, she's handling these projects. I didn't do it because of any favors. I did it because she was qualified and I had an opening. So I wasn't concerned about anything that she would say that would hurt us. I was concerned that she would plead the fifth and then people would make assumptions about that were wrong. And so I think the judge, rightly so, said, if that's your intention, whether you should be doing it or not, that's your right to do it, then, you're not going to do it out there.
Had she been on the 24-hour or 48-hour witness list to be called that day?
They had tried. They had to wait and do that in the afternoon. They had blew their deadline, and so they had to delay that too. But that was really an issue.
And then, so we'll kind of bring it to a close. So, closing argument. You spoke for about 50 minutes with notes. I didn't see any notes, and there's no teleprompters in there. Was that all?
I didn't have any notes.
That was all just, obviously you'd written it either in your head or written it out in some form or fashion.
I never wrote it. I never write that out. I had a PowerPoint, but it was just pictures. But the main message was made. The case was made. I think that video's been watched 7 million times, I think.
Your closing?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
And I've gotten probably, 50 to 100 letters and fan mail because of it from all over the country. It's really strange. It's and everywhere I go and across Houston with some of these groups I meet, people say, I watched that. I say, that's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And I'm thinking like, well, that's how my closing arguments are in every case we do. Is that there wasn't anything unusual about that one, other than the fact that it was delivered in the Senate chamber and the most historic case we've had in 100 years. But yeah, it apparently made a very big impact, not only in the case, but also across the country, because many of the senators, after the case was over, came over and shook my hand and said, that was amazing. That was really amazing. And so I guess it was just in the moment, the kind of the way it played itself out. Obviously you could tell I was in it. I was in the zone, and I believed what I was saying, and not politically believe it. I try to stay out of the politics of it, but just as a lawyer, I know what the burden of proof is. I know what evidence meets that burden, and they didn't meet it. And I knew some of the forces. Since the day I was hired, obviously I pay attention to Texas politics. I know that the players and the various camps that there are, but I've been criticized about the Bush thing, but, I talked about the Bush era. I was talking about the establishment Republicans, which is what, typically considered the Bush folks. And when I talk about TLR, there's no doubt that TLR, Texans for Lawsuit Reform, jumped on this and thought this was a way to get rid of Ken Paxton, because they spent almost $7 million against him when he ran against Eva Guzman and George P. And there's no doubt that the alleged drinking incident had some role in this. And there's no doubt that the whistleblowers I had to explain. You think about it, I had to explain all these things. I had to explain why Republicans voted against Republican Attorney General. I had to explain, this rift in the Republican Party between the establishment Republicans and those considered more conservative, aggressive Republican agenda, more Trump-type Republicans. I had to explain, how Dade Phelan, what his role in all this and why this was rushed the way it was. I had to explain, how the whole thing was a house of cards built on a bunch of hearsay and supposition. And I had to explain, the whistleblowers themselves. I had to explain that they had a role in this and that they jumped to a hell of a lot of conclusions that weren't legitimate or reasonable. And, so I had to kind of put all of that together, asking, well, when I first did the opening statement, can we get a fair trial? Can we get a fair trial? You remember me saying those kind of things. I was criticized. How many times when you're trying a case do you criticize the jurors? These people are so foolish. They don't understand what I was even doing. What are you even talking to those people? It's talking to the people listening and watching. Mm-hmm. And they didn't even get that. And I don't think that certainly the House managers never understood who their real audience was. And a lot of people on our team, even now, don't understand who our real audience was. But Ken Paxton knew. He certainly knew. Mitch Little knew. I knew. And so, that closing argument was kind of the culmination of a lot of angst that had built up. This whole thing started in May. And I think Ken Paxton felt really good about it. That, this is what I wish I could have said all that, because that's exactly the way I feel. And so, now he's doing his business, and he's in a position where he's very strong, and I think he's going to come through this, and I think he's focused on doing the state's work and doing it the way he does it. And whether you agree with it or not, he's going to do it. But and for a guy like him, who faced that kind of adversity from, professional, political, personal, for him to stand strong like that, because the easy thing for that guy to do would have just been to roll up and leave, because, he was getting bashed on a daily basis and had to sit there and watch himself get bashed by people that he trusted, knowing full well that they did the same thing the House did. They made a lot of conclusions. They jumped to a lot of conclusions, thinking that the evidence would support it, and it didn't. And instead of saying, like Drew Wicker did, you know what, the right result was reached. Maybe I was misinformed. Maybe some. That's what Drew Wicker, to his credit, Drew Wicker did that. How the whistleblowers, the so-called whistleblowers, the reason I keep calling them so-called is because to be a whistleblower, you have to have evidence of a crime. Mm-hmm. You have to have evidence of a crime. They didn't have it. They admitted they didn't have it. But instead of just doing what Drew Wicker did, they continue to go forward. They continue to have press conferences. I'm just surprised anybody listens to me.
And so what's the status of their case? I know the Supreme Court revived it, but is it now? Is there a contract a settlement agreement that's going to?
Well, the settlement was always contingent upon legislative funding, and there have been many settlements in Texas history against a various state agency that in a legislative session didn't get funded, but it's still binding. And then the next legislative session, it didn't get funded. It's still binding. But at some point, the legislature has funded it. That we don't know if it's going to be funded. I would expect it to be funded. But if it doesn't, and it has to be litigated, I wouldn't want to be the lawyer that litigates that after those people had testified, because I think they were discredited. I think they were really, and I think it says a lot that not all of them even showed up to testify. So, I think a lot of the things that they thought was true, and I think they probably sincerely believe when they had that crisis moment and they sent everybody home on the 8th floor, and they all got together and started sharing notes about Nate Paul, the boogeyman Nate Paul, and all this stuff, and they started jumping to conclusions. and they had this stray comment from Drew Wicker about check with Nate, and they put this puzzle. And Brickman even said, I would have had a field day with him. He said in his little unsworn statement that he was the one that put it all together. He's the one that put all the pieces together. He was the driving force behind, and you could tell how his demeanor was. He was the driving force behind all this. That's why he was very upset when he testified, because the whole thing crumbled. And they had all decided, after going back and forth, trying to get their something put together that showed a crime. And instead of calling Ken Paxton, they'd already crossed the Rubicon at that point. They knew they were never going to work at the AG's office anymore. They'd already made that decision, or they knew they weren't going to stay very long. And so they go to the FBI. And they'd already, in fact, what came out of the trial is they'd hired Johnny Sutton a week before that. A week before.
All of them had the same lawyer.
All of them had the same lawyer. All of them, of course, a lawyer they did not pay, had no contract with. They didn't know his hourly rate, and he was a former U.S. attorney appointed by Bush. You can't make it up. And it's a fact that the day they went to the FBI on October 1, 2020, is the same day that George P. Bush applied to reactivate his law license.
And so we had a question whether you actually had that evidence, because sometimes maybe you could imply you have that evidence, but you don't necessarily have the document. But you actually, for anyone watching it on TV, we didn't know this. You had it put, and you put it up on the PowerPoint at that.
Right.
So the jury saw the actual evidence that you had.
They did.
Of that.
The witness read off of it. Yep.
And that was someone in your office went and did some.
We had to do a deep dive to get that, because it wasn't on the State Bar website. So we had to do some work to get that, but it just so happened to be October 1, the very day they went to the FBI. And that's where the whole no coincidences Austin came from.
Well, you coined a term among others, because the prior term doctrine, it also has another name before you.
We decided early on, we thought that would get more traction with the Senate. It didn't get any.
And what is it called? Like
forgiveness doctrine.
Okay, and that means if you were elected after alleged crimes came up, you can't be impeached for those.
Right. And I didn't like that. And that wasn't just me. None of us liked that forgiveness doctrine. It implies or connotes that you've done something to be forgiven for.
Sure. And
I didn't like that. And so we bandied about what we're going to call it, and we call it the prior term doctrine, and that kind of stuck. And whereas previously they'd called it the forgiveness doctrine. If you look at all the press reports where it's discussed, they use the term prior term doctrine, and I think that that'll be in our lexicon forever. Just like there are no coincidences in Austin, just like the Bush era ends in Texas today, and some other things that some lady I saw the other day is like she kept using some word she said I used all the time, and I can't remember what it was now, but I how I do when across a witness and I don't like what he or she says, I usually I have a reaction to it, usually just a nonverbal type of just to let people know that I don't believe what this person's saying.
Right.
But I think one of the things a lot of people said was our experience with watching lawsuits, so we're usually pretty boring and pretty non-eventful, and there's no drama in it, and I don't really understand what the points are. And even when they score points, we don't really know their points are scored. And I think what I hope is that any young lawyer that watches, or any lawyer that watches, gets a sense of there are ways to do it where you can bring everybody along with you, like put everybody on the bus and ride along with you. A lot of times a lawyer's driving along by himself, and he thinks everybody's in the bus with him, but he's usually by himself. And I think one of the things we were able to do was bring everybody on the bus with us, and they could see where we were going, they can see what had happened, and they can understand things happened. They understood the significance of it. There was people could follow along without being bored to tears.
Well, I mean, I felt like that's something you do in your normal, quote unquote, normal cases, civil cases, is you contextualize the question and to let the jury know, hey, this is important, or this is why I'm asking this question, or this is why this answer is particularly interesting, with a little intro that, sometimes people object to, but it's...
Well, I mean, lawyers don't get is the most important witness in any case is the lawyer. You know, I don't care how many times a judge says what the lawyers say is not evidence. I don't care how many times they say that. What the lawyer says is incredibly important because she or he or whoever it is framing the case, if they're doing it right, signposting correctly, and making things people understand in context why we're doing this, why I'm asking these questions, why I'm calling you as a witness, why this document's important. You know, there's a lot that goes to it. You know, if you go up there, people are so focused on the mechanics of doing the work and asking the question in a non-leading way, and so they're so focused on that, they forget that you're there to be persuasive. You're not there just to put documents and testimony into evidence. You're there to make it important where you're persuading someone. And that's probably the disconnect that most people have watched actual trials. They're not interesting at all. They're not informative. They're not, you know, why would I ever want to be a lawyer? I've gotten so many emails and direct messages and letters of people that like, I want to be a lawyer now, because now they see how maybe it could be done. And I'm not suggesting I'm the only one that does it, but maybe they've never seen it done the right way before.
Yeah, because I mean, this was unique in that I watch a lot of Zoom, trials not on Zoom, on just the live stream. And it's great, but the production quality is not awesome, and you have to stay and watch the whole thing, or else you don't know what's important. This was, and then we've got Law and Order and the shows where case starts at the 32-minute mark and it's done at the
22 minutes, case over.
Yeah. So this was a unique one in that a lot of people could watch the whole thing. It was very well produced as far as the quality and all that, and they got to see excellent lawyers operate at a very high level. So Tony, appreciate your work on that, and I've tried to weave these questions in for younger lawyers or other lawyers that can apply it to their practice, but also really from a historical standpoint to get your take on this very important trial. So we really appreciate you taking so much time to talk about it.
Well, I'm glad to talk about it. I mean, it's it doesn't matter if history's not written. Right? I mean, it's a tree falls in the woods and nobody's there to hear it, then did it fall or not? I don't know the answer to that philosophical question, but what I do know is that these things come along so seldom that, the press is going to report what they're going to report from their point of view, and a lot of times that's a very, very thumbnail sketch of what actually was happening. And, if you want to know what happened, you might go to the horse's mouth and he might tell you.
Well, all we can hope for is that the Dirty Verdict podcast will be cited in a footnote of some
could be
long PhD, and then we'll be famous.
I hope so.
All right, Tony. Well, thanks a lot. We'll close this one out, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us this week. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also visit our website at www.dirtyverdict.com. If you are interested in coming on as a guest or have a story idea, please email us at story@dirtyverdict.com.